If you want to learn how to go viral on social media, how to deliver your message through social media channels, or if you're thinking about starting your own media company, then I think you're going to love today's episode. My guest today was Alex Banks. He went from 0 to 100,000 followers on Twitter in just 10 months. And he really figured out that game. He learned how to be a good storyteller. He learned what works. And then on top of that social media presence, he built a newsletter, which is now at 13,000 subscribers. And then on top of that, he also built a SaaS company recently. So he is an ambitious, clever young guy who I'm sure he's going to go on and do incredible things. And I'm sure you're going to learn a lot of interesting things from him. I sure did. And if you like stories about founders in the UK startups, if you want to learn about what's going on in the startup scene, then please subscribe to the podcast because that's what the Founders Lounge is all about. Now, enjoy the episode. Alex, welcome to the Founders Lounge.
Matisse, real pleasure to be here.
Man, so I came across you on Twitter. And I feel like I start half of my episodes like that because that's where I come across a lot of cool people. That's just how it is. And you create a lot of cool stuff. You are a content creator. You write a lot of cool stuff. You've grown your online presence a lot in a very short period of time, and I can't wait to dive into that. But maybe just to start, how do you introduce yourself? Like, who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Well, my name's Alex, for those of you who aren't aware. But no, I guess jokes aside, I've been creating content now for the last 10 months, so since January. But I guess my background more formally was in traditional finance ahead of me taking that leap from consumer to creator. But nonetheless, back in January, obviously took the step across the chasm and really decided to start exploring my curiosity in the world of finance, specifically relating to startups and venture capital. And it was through the continuation of my writing that I was able to form Through the Noise and ultimately bring about TribeScale, which is a new tool that was recently released back in September. So I guess slightly entrepreneurial. I love storytelling and everything in between. I think those are a couple of core characteristics that I like to hold myself to now, Matisse.
So a lot happened in the last 10 months from what I can see on the surface, right? And we're going to dive deeper into that. But you've got 100,000 or so followers on Twitter, which is, I mean, that probably brings you to like the top of Twitter users in some like top certain percentage in terms of the number of followers. And we'll talk more about that later because I'm just curious how you achieved that. But why? So you studied finance. How old are you now?
I'm 24.
How old are you now? You're 24. Okay, so I would imagine that most of your classmates went ahead and got a job in, I don't know, banking or McKinsey consulting or something. Why not that? Why did you decide? You said no, I'm gonna be tweeting a lot and I'm gonna make money with that.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story, Matisse. So I'm really glad you've raised this point. So.
All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
It was during COVID, so 2020, where I had wrapped up my undergraduate degree. I did that in economics and finance, and I was essentially in this little bit of limbo where there was a lot of uncertainty around where I really wanted to steer the direction of my career. And at least in terms of where that uncertainty led, I was going, it could be, me working in a bank, me being a consultant, but at least how I was defining that path there and then, Matisse, it was very uncertain. So I thought, look, I've got a little bit of time on my hands. Let me start an online blog, which failed horrendously because no one ever read anything that I wrote. And I was sort of questioning all my writing, going, look, I'd spent days on this. Why is no one reading it? Why is no one reading it? And then obviously that led to me starting writing on Twitter. But at least back then, during that time where everything was up in the air, there was a lot of restrictions in place. I was going, okay, how can I quite prudently characterize myself so that I could secure a future for myself and my loved ones? So I thought, look, let's start applying to master's degrees, because I'd always wanted to pursue finance that one layer further, and I thought a master's degree would be a nice opportunity to pull back the cover, so to speak. So I did, and I was lucky enough to be accepted to Imperial College London over here in the UK. And I studied for my master's in finance, and that began back in September of 2021. And I'll tell you what, it was such a wonderful experience, and the cohort was just spectacular. I mean, it combines individuals from all across the globe, Matisse, the far corners of, Bermuda, all across Asia, South Africa, every continent you can think of. This is sort of a hub of students from 127 nationalities, which is pretty wild.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it was very apparent after spending the first few weeks with these people that they were, or at least for the majority, there was a very clearly defined route that they wanted to exit from this program. It was either consulting or Big Four or investment banking. And I thought, oh, okay, this sounds quite flash. They're going to be flaunting their business cards. They're going to be having a whale of a time. So I thought, I'll see if this is catching my intrigue, so to speak. Anyway, as the weeks went by and the first few months, it was coming to sort of October, November time. So I was a good few months within the program, and this was when I started consuming quite a bit of content on Twitter. Now, I'd always had an account, but I was never particularly active. But these individuals started to come across my feed where they'd get thousands of likes, millions of impressions, and ultimately write some really interesting stories. And I'd go, this is kind of cool, because this guy or girl is writing something that they believe strongly about, and they can post it online for free, and that could be subject to thousands of eyeballs. And I thought, this is really starting to interest me, because the traditional route of finance that I was eyeing up, Matisse, it was very rigid, very, very hush-hush. It wasn't particularly spoken about outside of its select circles, versus playing the great online game and writing online. It was completely the opposite. It was sharing all my thoughts, a lot of freedom, a lot of, I guess, at least it wasn't, uninterrupted by select agendas or ideals or things like that. And having that freedom, so to speak, was really, really appealing. So I decided to take that leap coming to the end of 2021. And I started to write a little bit of my own within the remit of finance. And inside of which, I was quite unsure as to where I wanted to steer the boat, so to speak. There was a lot of uncertainty around, is it later stage private equity stuff that I want to be talking about, or is it early stage startups, is it storytelling? But I think one thing that, whilst it slightly tied me up at the beginning, is very clear now, Matisse, is that the more you write and the more consistent you are, the greater the clarity you get around where your niche will eventually be. And I think that's super, super critical in finding what not to do, which will then ultimately lead you to your calling and what your audience ultimately sees huge amounts of value that you provide. So started then developing my narrative, my niche around startups and storytelling. and found a little bit of traction, which was kind of cool. I guess March, April time. But the first sort of 3-4 months were a huge slog. I mean, you know, this was pushing content. It was sitting in the dark, and me going, okay, now my course mates here are sort of securing these job offers for analyst roles, associate roles at these huge institutions, and I'm here, you know, getting a like or two on one of my Twitter posts and going, is this really going to be sustainable? So I stuck with it nonetheless, and I weathered the storm, and it was one heck of a storm, to say the least. You know, I would spend hours and hours and realise that it would just sit in the dark, similarly to the blog that I made the year prior. So there was a lot of uncertainty around that, but ultimately, you know, things started to open up when I started writing more consistently, but also with a real focus on the hook, which is something I'm sure we'll come on to, Matisse. And yeah, it's been one heck of a ride since then.
And so since then, so you got to 100,000 or so followers. I think you're just about at 100,000 now on Twitter. But that's not it, right? So that's, if I understand correctly, that's your the top of the funnel, if we would talk about in marketing terms, right?
Yeah.
And then what's your business all about? So you've got a newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work then?
Sure. So the newsletter, Through the Noise, this came about in April this year, where I was online and my newsfeed would just get all of a sudden incredibly cluttered with a lot of noise.
Just one question before you continue. Sorry for interrupting you. So initially you just said, look, I'm just going to try to establish a presence for myself on social media, on Twitter specifically, and then we'll see what I'll build on top of that. Is that the case? Or did you have some idea already, some kind of strategy how you're going to leverage that online presence?
Sure. No, there was no strategy from the outset, Matisse. This was simply firing from the hip and seeing what would stick. So Through the Noise really came out incredibly organically through the content that I was consuming, and ultimately, you know, bucketed into what I liked and what I didn't like, and steered it towards, look, how can I give you this signal in a world of, you know, uncertainty and noise, and make sure that the quality that I'm writing is, you know, making you the most informed and, you know, happiest you can be, whether that be educating, entertaining. That was sort of the direction that I was steering it in, and at least how that sort of developed out, Matisse, it was very natural in the sense of, I knew I was passionate about startups and early stage venture capital, and I guess pairing that with some, you know, wonderful stories, whether that be, you know, about the PayPal mafia, so to speak, back in the sort of early 2000s, or whether that be the story of, you know, Duolingo from humble beginnings in Guatemala. I think being able to sort of uncover these insights and really dive into these topics that, you know, uncover a lot of truths and principles that we can ultimately learn from is massively valuable.
Very interesting. Okay, and so then you built your newsletter on top of your, basically funneling the visitors that come to your Twitter profile, funneling that into your newsletter, which now has over 10,000 subscribers, right?
Yeah, I think we've just eclipsed 13,000 subscribers on that. So launched that back in April.
All right. I mean, congratulations. Those are, in my opinion, those are pretty big numbers, especially it's all just organic growth, right? I mean,
correct.
Just through your content.
Yeah, no, I paid for 0 paid ads.
There you go. So that's all just quality content that you produce. You know, one thing that I was thinking about when I was looking at your content, how do you think you manage to create space? So one thing that I often think about a lot is when you're thinking about new business idea or about new, even just like marketing campaigns, like how are we going to stand out? How are we going to be different? Because it's often doesn't make any sense to create another business that's going to be just the same as all the others, right? And there are a lot of newsletters and blogs out there that write business stories and communicate stories and frameworks, kind of like what you're doing. What do you think? Did you think about your own positioning, or how do you think you managed to kind of establish yourself as quite an authority at this point in a space that on the surface at least, seems relatively crowded. I think it's really impressive that that you managed to actually build such a big presence relatively quickly.
Yeah, there are definitely a couple of angles that I want to highlight around this, Matisse, because you are totally true in the space of startups, business frameworks, mental models, systems. You hear these buzzwords everywhere, but I think it takes a lot of tact, a lot of careful construction to build something that actually people want to watch, people that want to revisit. And that's a big point there, not just sort of a one-time flash in the pan, but something that has already something that builds the trust with your audience enough that they go, okay, next time I see a thread by him or a newsletter post by him, I'll click on it again because I know that the value I got last time was above my threshold, so to speak. So I think it's really, really important there. And at least one of the ways I like to do this, and perhaps the most obvious or unobvious from the angle you look at it, is building your own personal monopoly. And I think your unique perspective on the world is really, really cool because no one else has that. It's totally yours. And so your ability to share that and impart that on the world is free, and no one else shares that with you. So you are the best at telling your story and telling it from your perspective and your narrative and the way you put your spin on things. So I think just from a high level, seeing that as your competitive advantage is super, super cool, and something that I've really, really started to embody, Matisse. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was, I guess, staying specifically to the length of the content, making it succinct and to the point. I think it says it in very much the name of the content that I'm writing, which is Through the Noise, where I'm very careful not to waffle or go on about points. I'm obviously learning buckets as I do with the feedback emails that I get. Oh, this is great, this is terrible. Do more of this, do less of that. But I think in terms of having it as a principle that you have, trying to have brevity in your writing, staying succinct, and trimming the fat, so to speak, in anything you do, just makes your audience a lot more, at least from the perspective of that user, they are a lot more, they're at least a lot happier with how they perceive your content, because it isn't, oh my goodness, I have to trawl through paragraphs and paragraphs to finally get to the point. It's, okay, he's actually highlighted it in bold in the first sentence. So I guess from a TLDR perspective, it's quite nice.
Interesting. So I want to get back to the point you mentioned. You add your unique perspective, your own personality, your own spin on the content that you have, right? And I think that's such a critical part. And I've thought about that a lot because, partially just I have a podcast, right? So it's like the podcast needs to have, again, the same as what you're doing. It needs to be different in some ways, right? It needs to be appealing to a certain audience. It needs to be not just a copy of all the other business podcasts out there. And I remember reading, must have been like 2 years or 3 years ago, there was this mega thread by Naval, Naval Ravikant, right? I assume. And he talked about this concept of productizing yourself. So Naval is, for those who don't know, he's like this very prominent angel investor from Silicon Valley, founder of the Angel List. He's an angel investor in like 200 or 300 plus, anyway, hundreds of startups. And he's a bit of a philosopher as well, these days especially. He used to be more of a businessman, and now he's more and more transitioning into a philosopher kind of persona. And he teaches, he tweets about life and business. And he has this concept of productizing yourself, where he talks about how every person is uniquely, in its own unique way, the best in the world at something, right? And you have to figure out what is that thing that you're the best in the world at. And you keep redefining that and tweaking that until you figure it out, until you find out what you can be uniquely, exceptionally good at. And that's how you succeed, or that's how you can become, financially successful, but also fulfilled, because you're actually doing something that you're just talented at. And it's interesting. I thought about it quite a lot, because it's like, how do you figure that out, right? You try different things. I think you bring a certain unique combination of experiences, right? So in your case, you studied finance, and then, well, I don't know what else you've kind of done in life, but I guess you bring different perspectives from different experiences that you had in life, different interests, certain unique, I don't know, personality type perhaps as well. I'm curious, that's kind of how I think about it, but I'm wondering how you think about it, and how did you go about discovering that angle? Or was it all just, you were creating stuff, just being super authentic? I think it's super important. And I think also a lot of people struggle with that, in my opinion, because everyone thinks, oh, I don't know what I'm good at. I'm not really good at anything. Or you just see people out there who seem to be incredibly skilled, and like, well, but I'm not as good as they are in that particular thing. But it looks like you found something that really works for you, right? In a relatively crowded space.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned those two words there, Matisse. Productize yourself, because if ever anyone now asks me for advice on, how can I start writing online or creating content or at least changing the trajectory of my career, those are the two words that I say. You must productize yourself, and they go, what on earth does that mean? And then I sort of go on to this sort of diatribe, all on the sort of, at least what Naval wrote in that thread. But I think the underlying point of, look, if you can find what you are uniquely suited to provide the most value to the world at, then you'll do incredibly well, whether that be pottery, fine art, finance, you name it. It could really take one of many, many different things. And at least how I've crafted this, but also reflected on it as I've gone about this last 10-month period, Matisse, is, I think in one way it's been naturally organic, where going from January and starting writing, it was almost like feeding from a fire hose, where I was learning I'm learning every single day about what to write, what not to write, how to write better cold emails, how to form better relationships, how to give without expectation, all of these things that you learn quite quickly, and learn how this great online game works. And at least from that sort of natural element, I think it's incredibly rewarding, in its sense that there's a lot of unknown when you go about writing online or creating content. And I think having that humility to just hold your hand up and go, look, no one really knows what we're doing. We're only trying our best and trying to write what we believe we are passionate about and what we believe other people can at least benefit from. And when you sort of strip it back to its core and see it like that, as quite black and white and quite primal in its real essence, Matisse, it gets really, really cool. Because then, nothing matters, but everything matters. I guess we're getting a little bit sort of philosophical here, but at least from my perspective, I am super focused in the day-to-day for what I can control. But at least from the bigger picture, from knowing what I'm uniquely suited to provide the world with, I know that it may accept it, it may reject it, and that's absolutely okay. But as long as I'm controlling what I can in the here and now, then I can at least go to bed at night with a smile on my face, knowing that I almost gave it, really gave it my all, and I guess left no stone unturned, to use an analogy there. So that's really how I see things.
Interesting. All right. Very cool. Good. So Twitter and then newsletter. Are you monetizing newsletter, or what's the plan there?
Yeah. So I'm actually in the process of doing so. So since quite quickly eclipsing 10,000 subscribers, I've just opened up the newsletter for partnerships. So I guess businesses and individuals who I can get behind, whether they're an entrepreneur or an organization that's ultimately here to impart a lot of value on the world, and that I can help support and help uplift their message, whether that be through sponsorship, or whether that be through perhaps a deep dive into their company and uncovering what they're doing and the awesome ways that they're going to be changing the world. Those are, I guess, two different angles that I see things taking forward there, Matisse.
Cool. And what do you think the plan is here? So I'm not sure how much of a strategy you have, because it seems like you're you're like doing things, and then you just kind of see where the opportunity arises, and then you go after that. That's from the brief conversation that we had so far. That's kind of what I get. But I'm curious if you have any bigger plans here. Is like building a media empire, or what do you think it's going to be in a few years from now, perhaps?
Yeah. No, I really like that question. I think you are totally true in the essence of, look, I am building very much a portfolio of small bets. So I focus on what I can control and how I can, at least the angles that I do see, if it's perhaps the thin end of a fat wedge and I can see that opening up, then I will absolutely, give it the time of day and the attention that it deserves. And that's, what I'm doing today with TribeScaler, and also the media arm with Through the Noise too. The way I see this moving forward, Matisse, is, look, I am always trying to increase the surface area of luck of not only myself but also the entity that is the newsletter. I think being able to iterate on the feedback that I get from my readers is massively, massively important, and often overlooked by, I guess, creators in very much of an earlier stage, where they perhaps overlook the initial feedback and just go with their perception of how they think things are versus how they actually are, which can often be wildly, wildly different. So iterating on the feedback that I get, but also steering the ship to an entity that ultimately provides insight through storytelling, and also fast hitting insights to the world of tech and startups and venture funding that can ultimately make you smarter each week.
That's also true. That's also a good point. Okay, that's cool. And then, so you mentioned the portfolio of small bets before, right? Are you referring to, so there's Daniel Vasallo, I think is his last name, who talks about that, or does that term come from somewhere else? I've heard him talking about it. It kind of, to me, that's like his thing.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't actually know it was wholly attributed to Daniel. I think it's just something that I've picked up as part of the process.
That's just where I see it usually, but
yeah,
right, yeah, okay.
But I think it's such a wonderful concept because, well, Warren Buffett has a great quote where he says, "Put all your eggs in one basket and look after the basket," which is absolutely one way of doing it. And I think there is, or at least individuals have huge success going about things that way. But also, the portfolio of small bets approach is rather appealing in the sense of, look, I am me, I am Alex, or you are Matisse, and you are building, you're developing things that you have an innate curiosity for. That might be writing on Twitter, that might be recording a podcast, writing a newsletter. And by doing these things, we often see, okay, this works here, perhaps that doesn't work there. And by learning very quickly and iteratively, and by having speed as that fundamental principle, you quickly realize that this is quite a good thing to pursue, but also, on the other hand, this perhaps is something that I should avoid. And at least how that allows you to direct the future is, okay, perhaps it's time to drop item X and put all my attention to item Y. But you know that much quicker than if you were to perhaps just go for item X all the way and then hit a very, very abrupt stop and get your sort of hands muddy and your sort of backs on the floor, and you're not in a particularly good place. So I see this not only as, I guess, a personal hedge, but as a way of just maximizing my serendipity and my curiosity, because I'm wildly passionate about a range of things, Matisse, and being able to pursue at least a few of these things, whilst also having the ability to make it sustainable as well and turn it into a cash flowing business is super, super cool.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's quite interesting because for a while I was kind of beating myself up. I was like, man, this common knowledge is you are supposed to focus on one thing and just put all your effort and all your time into that, and then that's going to be successful. Otherwise, it cannot be successful. But I never really enjoyed that. I would always gravitate to doing at least like 3 different things at the same time, meaning like having 3 different projects or ideas or something that I was developing, right? And I realized that there are people who are very reasonably successful. Obviously, I don't think you can build the next Uber like that. well, unless you're Elon Musk, he's like probably literally like the only person alive who can handle managing 3 gigantic companies at the same time. But you know, he's not a human, so that's different. But us normal people, we can probably only manage a slightly lower amount of complexity, I suppose, and stress and effort and so on. But you can have what you said before, a portfolio of small bets, and all of them can make some money, and still maybe one of them eventually becomes huge, right? And I would always leave that option, and maybe one of them just becomes huge, and I'll say, well, everything else is now less important, and I'm going to focus on this one thing. But until that happens, you can easily, I think, work on several different things. But yeah, it is, while being careful about how you manage your time still, and energy, of course, and finances as well. You mentioned TribeScaler a few times, but I didn't really talk about what that is yet. So do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. No, happy to. TribeScaler is such a wonderful story, which I have huge amounts of passion for since launching back in September. But perhaps we should do a bit more storytelling, Matisse, and I can sort of tell you sort of the build up to how it was launched and my ultimate passion behind it. So perhaps the best way to kick things off is with a quote, Matisse. So Paul Graham, incredibly famous in the startup scene with respect to obviously Y Combinator. He famously said that, look, the way to get a startup idea is not to try to think about startup ideas, but it's to look for problems, preferably problems that you face yourself. And I think for me, and how I saw this in the context of writing on Twitter, Matisse, was quite clear. When I started writing, getting eyeballs on your social media posts is incredibly difficult. It's a hard task to do, and I was struggling with it for the first 3, 4, 5 months that I was publishing online. Even if you're an individual who writes the best content in the world, you're still going to face this same conundrum of, look, how can I get this piece of content, whether it be a TikTok, a YouTube video, a Medium article, a tweet, seen by millions? But it's only when you look back, it becomes awfully clear what the to-do thing was. And I guess, moving that forward now, or at least relating it to my content creation journey. So back in December of 2021, Matisse, I was trying my hand at Twitter, as we previously spoke about, and at the time, I was crowded by imposter syndrome, where I've spent, the past 3, 4, 5 years consuming individuals' tweets, their videos, their content, and I'd very much been this lurker that it's termed, and it's quite a nice rule on the internet called the 1% rule, where, look, only 1% of users actually create content online. 9% interact. They might comment. They might like. The other 90% only consume. They lurk, which is what I was doing. And I guess shortly after making this switch, Matisse, between going from consuming vast amounts of content to going, okay, I've obviously started this master's program. There was a lot of uncertainty to at least what I was doing after, but how can I now start creating? And this was when I crossed paths with another guy called Alex, a guy called Alexander Learvag. He's from Oslo in Norway, and I met him through Twitter. The power of the internet never ceases to amaze me. And whilst both of us were inherently new to the platform, I was immediately blown away by his presence as an individual, as a character. He had deep data expertise, deep knowledge of AI, and needless to say, we got on like a house on fire. And so we shared this deep curiosity for what made, these original gangsters of Twitter blow up. How are these individuals, guys and girls, getting 5,000 likes, 10,000 likes, 50,000 likes on their threads? What on earth was the secret sauce to going viral? I sure wanted in. I wanted to know what was happening under the covers here, because it was cool. So I think one point I do want to highlight here is, look, it is challenging making content that people genuinely want to share, right? So I guess seeing that in its light, you go, how can I promote shareability? That's when the aha moment kicked in, because the best content doesn't get read. The best hooks get read, at least with respect to Twitter, to TikTok. You are grabbing the individual's attention. You want to stop their scrolling. That's the ultimate function of what you're wanting to do. So, at least with Twitter, look, the hook is the most important factor in the success of your content. If you have a mediocre hook and great content, your content will just sit in the dark. If you have a great hook but mediocre content, your content will get some eyeballs, but people will quickly swipe off because you're not following through. If you have a great hook and great content, that is where the wombo combo lies, because you're not only sparking emotion, but you're also following through with that promise, which is really, really cool. So, at least how I was finding myself in this process in the early months of writing online, I was sending different versions of the hook to friends to get their response. We were going back and forth daily. I was asking them, look, is this catchy enough? Am I drawing you in? What are your comments on this? Am I sparking your emotion? Would you click on it if you saw it on your Twitter feed, Matisse? And I guess from this, the learning curve was exceptionally steep. Hence, I alluded to this earlier, where a lot of my content would just sit in the dark because I wasn't prioritizing the hook. And I think from this, it very much raised the question of where was I going wrong? Because I was writing threads on Twitter, but I knew it was an important part to grow. But at least from the outset, look, it's very difficult for me to ideate 40 original thoughts per day, let alone make them go viral. So that meant, in turn, I was prioritizing quality over quantity. I was spending huge amounts of time coming up with these ideas, but not enough time. How can I actually grab their attention? So then begged the question, look, how can I actually do both of these things, quality of content and also capture attention at lightning speed? So that was when Alexander and I had this, grand plan of, look, how can we come together and how can we build something to help us win this great online game? So look, both of us wanted our content to reach the masses, but there was an awful lot of catching up to do with these individuals who were, these guys had hundreds of thousands of followers. They were rocking the socks off. They were, real rock stars. And, I was going, look, how can we not only be known and liked, but most importantly, Matisse, trusted? Trust is absolutely paramount for everything that you do online. It really sets the precedent for if an individual is going to watch your stuff, if they're going to subscribe to you, if they're going to believe in you enough to perhaps purchase something that you might offer to give them value. And so trust is really the epicenter of your online presence. So from this, where could Alexander and I derive our unfair advantage? And that was when I actually stumbled across a tweet at the beginning of this year, and it was by a lady called Magdalena Carla. And she said that, look, effective data analysis and storytelling, this combination, it is the most dangerous superpower combination in the world of business. These two skills, they underpin almost everything. You've got fundraising, recruiting talent, building an excellent product, the selling, the marketing, everything inside of it is underpinned by these two things. So as soon as that was properly internalized, and that you needed both of these things to win, I went, okay, Alexander, he has data analysis nailed. The storytelling part, I want to try my hand. So that was when, at the beginning of this year, we were like, right, let's start to develop a tool that can be your own writing assistant and personal collaborator that's powered by AI. Leveraging Alexander's deep AI expertise with my, I guess, growing ability to, and at least growing enjoyment to tell a story. I thought, let's find the marriage of these two ideas and see what we can make happen. So that was when TribeScaler was born, because the first iteration was glaringly obvious. How can we write better hooks in seconds to help make your tweets go viral? And that was something that I was struggling with for many, many months on end. And so, after months of testing and having hundreds of early users test out the product, we are here where we are today, Matisse. We are just coming to the end of month 2. We are, guns blazing and having an absolute whale of a time. It's been a real joy, and we couldn't be more excited to take things going on into the latter half of this quarter and 2023.
Very cool. So in its current shape, so TribeScaler now helps you. How exactly does it work? Can you kind of describe that?
Sure. I'll talk you through a typical process. So say, Matisse, I want to write a thread on startup storytelling. Okay, startup storytelling specifically by Elon Musk. So this was actually a thread I did not that long ago. It was his sort of storytelling principles that he used back in 2015 when he was presenting the Tesla Powerwall, which was a great speech, which I recommend everyone to go and visit. Anyway, say, for example, I want to write a thread on that because it's something that I love. I love startup storytelling. How can I create a hook that's going to really capture an individual's attention? So the first place to start when you're kicking off your content creation cycle for this piece is TribeScaler. You go to tribescaler.com, you log in, you enter your keywords, which are storytelling, Elon Musk, principles, hit generate. And what it will do is it will generate for you 6 totally original hooks that you can use at the click of a button in a matter of seconds. You might start with keywords, but at the same time, you might already have a bit of an idea of what a hook might look like. You might go, Elon Musk is worth X billion dollars. Here are 10 storytelling principles that will make you a better storyteller, something like that. But it's okay, but it doesn't quite have the ring to it that a great hook should. So what you can do is you can copy that and you can paste it into TribeScaler's hook refiner. And what it will do is it will generate different iterations of that hook for you that are better and subtly different, that are perhaps better or just a little bit different that you maybe wouldn't have considered before. So then you can use those and you can edit it to suit your voice and you can add your creative flair and then you can pluck that, put it into whatever thread writer you use and off you go to the races. And then you can go and go with all out creativity. That's how it works in its initial. So we're very much focusing on the hook, which is the opener to your content. At least how we see this going forward, Matisse, is really, really cool because the opportunities are unbounded, right? If we think about Twitter as a vertical, for instance, we've got the thread writing process, which is, we're starting incredibly niche. We're not just going Twitter here. We're not just going thread writing, but we're going the hook in a thread in Twitter, which is a super, super niche product to start with. But that's exactly where we want to position ourselves because we want to, ultimately monopolize this niche and then ultimately the market as a vertical. So seeing it from going from hooks to then tweets where you can enter some keywords, or perhaps you've maybe consumed a great blog article or a newsletter or even a thread, you can paste that in and it will repurpose tweets for you that are, again, totally original, plagiarism free, that you can use, you can edit, you can tailor to your own voice, and you can have that as part of your inspiration bank and ultimately post that to Twitter. So seeing it go from hooks to threads to tweets, and then perhaps if we go, okay, hooking the reader's attention is really, really important, but not just for Twitter. If we might think to LinkedIn, we might think to blog articles as well. We might think perhaps SEO terms or maybe job descriptions or CVs and cover letters. And all of a sudden, the range of possibilities just opens up.
Ads also come up in my mind,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Directly people spend money on loads of money on ads, right? And if you can help them make those ads more, because it's the same, the hook in the ad is the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
And it could be, well, it could be TikTok ads, but even more anything in text, whether that's Facebook or, very cool. Okay. That's, I mean, 100%, you're riding the wave of the AI opportunities that are coming up with lightning speed right now. And I think it seems like you're just at the right place at the right time to build on top of that, on top of what the technology allows us to do right now. And I think people are starting to see how useful it can be, right? And how it's going to make a huge difference, especially in content creation. But I think it's going to go way beyond that as well.
Yeah. No, totally true. And I just one point I do want to highlight there, Matisse, with respect to what you mentioned with helping content creators, is there was a great speech by Sam Altman. So he is the CEO of Copy AI, and he was getting interviewed by
OpenAI, right?
Reed.
He's the CEO of OpenAI.
OpenAI. Yeah. OpenAI. And he was getting interviewed by Reed Hoffman, one of the general partners, and over at Greylock. And he was essentially saying that, look, the way AI, or at least 10 years ago, the way we thought AI would come for, jobs and, I guess, layers of the economy was, look, first it will come for the blue-collar work, then it will be, low-skill white-collar, then high-skill white-collar, so programming, coding, and then ultimately creative jobs. But how that's actually turned out to be is in the complete opposite. It's directly the creative output first, and then it's sort of scaling back into that tier system, Matisse. So it's really, really interesting to see. But I think one common misconception that people think about AI is that it's going to be incredibly binary. It's going to be, the humans will win or the machine will win. It's going to be one or the other. It's going to take our jobs or it won't. Yeah. Versus if you adjust that framing slightly and go, look, actually AI can be a real force for good because it can actually augment our creativity. It can enhance our creativity as we go about our tasks, our working day, the tasks that we need to achieve. Seeing it in that light is massively, massively important because it then doesn't go from, oh my goodness, there's huge amounts of uncertainty. It goes, oh my goodness, there's huge amounts of opportunity. Where this will lead over the next few decades is super interesting, and I couldn't be more excited.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it seems like it's one of those huge groundbreaking things that are happening right now, and they're very much, out in the public, in the eyes of everyone, and they are moving incredibly fast. As in, I think the development is moving very fast, but also every tweak that's happening right now. So obviously there's been GPT-3 and there's been DALL-E and so on and so forth. And we've talked about that on the podcast before on previous episodes. And every small tweak there just creates this massive amount of new opportunities, right? Do you see what Peter Levels is doing? Are you following that guy on Twitter?
Yeah.
Do you see his latest AI tool? What is it, like the Avatar something?
Yeah, the Avatar one. That was super, super cool.
That is wild. So there's this guy, for those who don't know, there's this guy, Peter Levels, who I've talked about him on the episode, on some of the previous episodes, because he's just a fascinating guy. He's super interesting. Also indie founder with a pretty large portfolio of bets now, and he's making, I think his total revenue is like over $1 million per year for sure, with like some wild 70 or 80% profit margin or something like that. And his latest creation is, I believe it's called avatar.ai or like aiavatar.com or something like that. I'll have to look it up. I can link to it in descriptions. And what it does is, I think you upload your photos, and it feeds the AI algorithm. The AI understands how your face looks like, and then it generates AI-generated avatars that look like you, but they're also enhanced in certain ways. Or you might look like a superhero, or like a cartoon character, or like a zombie, or like a Santa, or he's got all these different styles, and it looks really cool. And I think it's going very much viral, at least on Twitter right now, because people are just posting their avatars and they're always tagging him and his business, and then everyone else goes ahead and they generate their avatars. And I don't know what's his latest revenue number, but he launched that, maybe 3, 4, 5 days ago, and I know that he already passed $10,000 in revenue, and that was yesterday, if not even earlier. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's in like tens of thousands at the moment. With, again, just through his audience and just going viral, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. Crazy. But I think, the point I'd love to make is that whilst there are millions of applications for AI, there's a lot to be said about, look, how can we actually create an enduring differentiated business here with AI? Because it's really intriguing to go. There are a couple of approaches. One is, how can we create, something a little bit hacky, a little bit flashy that is like kind of cool, but what are the sort of long-term implications of it? And the other is, okay, how can we actually build our own model for XYZ? And I think I'm skeptical of both, in the essence of if you're trying to sort of build it from scratch, you're wasting enormous amounts of time, and you're trying to compete with the likes of OpenAI and so forth. So I think that the real value lies in that fine tuning of the model. You can create something with enduring value because you have a special tuned version of the model yourself, and that then in turn builds your own data flywheel, which is your moat. And that is a real differentiator. Yeah,
that's where it seems to be right now. Yeah, exactly. I haven't really tried building anything with AI, but with any of those, existing models. But that's where I see that existing products, that's what it seems to be their thing, their differentiator there. Interesting times. What was I going to say? So, there's another question that came up in my mind when we were talking about, Twitter audience, and you mentioned Lux surface area before, which is a concept that I've also talked about before in the podcast at some point. And I think having Twitter presence or having online presence, any sort of, being out there, dramatically increases your Lux surface area, because you're just out there and people know about you and people know about what you do and who you are. And I suppose they also kind of want to connect with you sometimes because, I guess you come across as an interesting person. And you mentioned, so you met your co-founder through Twitter, and I met you through Twitter, right? I see your content, and I was like, okay, the guy looks interesting. Let's have a chat. Are there any other opportunities that this brought to you, being out there and building an audience?
I think fundamentally, it's the relationships, right? Relationships underpin every element, whether that be, having a dinner with an individual or building a billion-dollar business, each of which is defined by the relationships that you have and the relationships that you nurture. So I've met some fascinating individuals through my time on Twitter in a very short space of time. It has to be said, I've only been here for a little over 10 months, and with through the noise, the individuals that I've chatted with there, a good friend of mine now, and whilst I've never met him in person, speaking online, a gentleman called Dave Klein, so he's the ex-COO over at Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. If I were to think about me pursuing my career in traditional finance, going, okay, when would I ever have the opportunity to interact with a man of that caliber? It would have been probably 10, 15, 20 years versus compressing these timelines drastically, speaking to general partners, founders, of tier one VC funds and billion-dollar businesses that it's wild to even comprehend. But that's what the internet does. It not only compresses timelines, but it increases your interconnectivity and opportunity to build relationships in a form which would have otherwise been impossible in a real world setting.
Yeah, it's really cool and it's really interesting. Also makes me think, I think a lot of people want to be on TikTok right now because it's, there's a lot of opportunity there, obviously, and it's like this flashy thing, and everyone sees it everywhere. I think Twitter is a completely different medium. That's much more. I don't use TikTok that much. We're trying a little bit now with the podcast, but I'm not an active consumer of TikTok. But I think I love Twitter because it's a bit more intellectual. And I think when you establish yourself on Twitter, you get your doors open to people like what you were saying right now. Whereas I think you don't get that on TikTok. I don't know. Again, no personal experience, but I just can't really see that happening on TikTok. Well, on Twitter is not so unusual. I think it's, I guess it's a testament of sort of your work and your intellect and your talent, but different talent than on TikTok. On TikTok, you're a talented entertainer more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
Can be educator as well, though. I'm not being, maybe I'm not being fair to some educators on TikTok there.
I think the overarching principle is, look, go where your audience already hangs out. In the case of Twitter, a lot of that is educational, similar to Reddit versus TikTok, Reels, Shorts. A lot of that is fast-paced, catchy stuff that a lot of people want to be entertained by, just for the majority from the sort of limited exposure that I've had there. But I think that's totally cool in that the opportunity sets are quite different, but very unique. So seeing the merits for each and, totally respecting that, and then going where you think your message is most uniquely suited, it would be my one piece of advice. Yeah.
One topic that I have to bring up, considering what's happening right now, Elon Musk just bought Twitter.
Yeah.
Thoughts? What do you think? Are you concerned? Do you think that's a massive opportunity? What do you think he's going to do?
Yeah. Well, obviously seeing him walk into Twitter HQ with a big old sink and hearing Rahul Nigma and
what a character! Oh my god,
being brutally fired.
I'm currently opening Twitter more often just to see what Elon is doing with it, just to see either the rumors or the drama around it or the new features that are going to be popping up very soon.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to observe.
I think, look, Elon is an incredible character. He's got a very clear track record with seeing a vision, and his speed of execution is unparalleled. Seeing that he was, firing X amount of people and, holding all hands on the new product development features and so on within a matter of, hours. It's completely wild. And a man who operates at that speed, is capable of huge things, and that's seen with, SpaceX, Boring Company, Tesla. So I'm really excited to see where he will take things with Twitter. I'm a big advocate. Maybe from a financial standpoint, it may not make the most sense, but from a character building standpoint and from a opportunity for free speech for the world, I think the opportunities are endless. And whilst there are drawbacks to that that are often painted in quite a negative light, I think from a holistic standpoint, it can be very much net positive for the world. Yeah.
I just can't wait to observe because we'll be all right there. It's all going to be happening right there in front of our eyes. And I'm just looking forward. I'm just excited to see how he executes, right? Because he's this, arguably, you could say the best entrepreneur of our generation, right? And the best engineer of our generation. Yeah. Again, debatable, but one of the best for sure. And it's obviously insane that he did that, considering that he already has SpaceX and Tesla to run. But as you said, his track record is also just insanely good. So I think he's going to do something good with it. I do believe that he's going to go. I think he's one way or another, he's going to figure it out. And he's going to upset a lot of people in the process, undoubtedly. And a lot of people are going to be angry and sad, but that's the price that I suppose he's going to have to pay. I think that's just the kind of process that he got himself into, and that's how much it's going to cost to just turn this ship around and make it also profitable, which I actually have very little doubt that he's going to make it profitable and that he's going to make it make Twitter an even more successful business. And but mostly, as you said, it's just interesting observing his crazy speed of execution and just making stuff happen from literally, within the first few hours of finishing the transaction, right?
Yeah. No, I couldn't be more excited, Matisse. It'll be a ride for sure.
It will be a ride, yeah. And I'm just excited to follow what's going to be happening there. A few quick rapid fire questions for the end.
Sure.
What is the one book or person or experience that influenced your life the most?
Oh, goodness. I think I would have to choose book, but I would slightly cheat and say it was a combination of two. So one...
go ahead, that's fine.
Fundamentally it was... so Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's a brilliant book, early 2nd century philosopher.
Yes.
I think when you look at that book and his writings outside of the context of just philosophy itself, but to life, to business, to relationships, how you conduct yourself as a man or lady, and how you go about your business in day-to-day life, I've found to be unparalleled in its writing and in its meaning. So that would be, I guess, my number one. And I think slicing that pie would have to be the Almanac of Naval Ravikant by Eric Jorgensen. That was another exceptional book. I read that and listened to the audiobook concurrently back in sort of September, October last year, and that was one of the major impetuses for me to start writing online and to start productizing myself, as we've spoken about today. When you can hold yourself accountable, use huge amounts of leverage, and have that specific knowledge and impart it to the world, then great things are possible. So a combination of those two.
Nice. Yeah, I've read Naval's Almanac, and I can only highly recommend it to everyone. And it's a thin book. It's not that much to read, but it's absolutely fantastic. I have not read Meditations. I've heard good things about it. And one thing that I remember about it is, who said that? Somebody said something that it really stuck with me, was because Meditations, it was his diary, right? It was his journal where he was just journaling. Correct. It was never meant to be published, right? It was his personal.
It was never
journal.
meant to be published. It was his own personal thoughts. It was advice from friends, from colleagues, but also his day-to-day living, his perception on the world.
So fascinating, because you get to see what this incredibly powerful emperor was thinking about and doing on a day-to-day basis, and just you get to read his private thoughts, and they were not that different from, like, his struggles were not that different from everyone else's struggles. That's what I heard from somebody who read the book, and that's kind of calming, or just makes you feel like, well, okay, he was one of, or maybe the most powerful person in the world at the time, and he was just struggling with the same kind of issues as a person, right, as we struggle with today, or as every individual does. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it's definitely on my reading list to dive into it at some point. Right, another question. So you're a startup geek, and you read a lot about companies and founders, and I'm wondering if you have an opinion on what separates okay founders from great founders.
Yeah, sure. The single most important trait of an entrepreneur, Matisse, is an individual who can tell a story. Those are the people who garner attention. Those are the people who hire talent. Those are the people who get the fundraising. Those are the people who win the deals. If you are an exceptional storyteller, then you are destined for a lot of good luck and at least a higher probability of a favorable outcome. Now, at the same time, you also have or at least that element taken to the extreme, because you might get a Theranos, another Elizabeth Holmes, where all she did was storytelling, and there's no proof in the pudding, so to speak. So you've got to be an exceptional storyteller, but also deliver on the value that you intend to provide to the world.
Yeah, that's it. You mentioned that several times. You have to deliver. You have to have trust in yourself. That I can see that's important to you, and I can only just agree that is the fundamental part, right? Once you burn that, it's very hard to rebuild it.
Yeah.
And final question, which I also think I have a sense that you'll have a good answer to it. Let's see. But what's your strategy for consistently improving yourself? I think a lot of humans, but especially anyone who's fairly ambitious, it's like, I need to get constantly better and better and better. And that's an important aspect of life.
I love that. Consistently improving myself. Okay. I think radical open-mindedness would be my answer. Always having the humility to be proven wrong and be proven otherwise. I think if you approach life with that, you'll do very well, because you're always a truth seeker. You always want to retain your unique take on the world and never take anything as gospel. You want to be finding your believable parties who can help find those truths individually to lead to that constant improvement. So radical open-mindedness would have to be my answer.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Alex, thank you so much. This brings us to the end. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think a lot of people can learn a lot from you, especially when it comes to storytelling, content creation. I would say you absolutely mastered those things, and I'm just looking forward to observe what else is going to come. What else you're going to create. I mean, it's truly impressive how much you've accomplished in this space in a short period of time. So, man, I just wish you best of luck. And yeah, everyone go follow Alex. We're going to link to all your profiles, your newsletter. We're going to link to everything in the episode description. So everyone go check out Alex. He shares a lot of cool stuff on business and startups and mental models and so on. So, man, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed this.
Matisse, it's been a real pleasure. I always love conversations like these that are raw, open, honest, and you can really dive into an individual's characters. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube, or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast. Key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.